What made your mom completely change overnight? My mom came downstairs and asked in English if we wanted pancakes, and my brother choked on his orange juice because she hadn't spoken a word of English to us in 16 years. When I responded in our language like she'd trained us to do since we could talk, she looked at me with empty eyes and said she didn't understand what I was saying. My brother tried asking her what was going on in our language, and she just kept shaking her head saying, "English only in this house from now on," please, like she was reading from a script. Before that moment, she was the kind of immigrant parent who made sure we never forgot where we came from, refusing to speak English at home even though she taught it at the community college. But now she was throwing away all our books in our native language and removing everything with our writing on it, including the prayer banner grandmother had made. She started acting like she couldn't understand when Grandpa called from the old country, even though I could hear him crying through the phone asking what he'd done wrong. She told him in English that he had the wrong number and hung up while he was still talking, then blocked his number and all our relatives' numbers too. When the lady from the cultural center came by to ask why Mom hadn't been teaching her weekend classes, she stood at the door and insisted she didn't know what the woman was talking about. The woman kept speaking in our language, asking if everything was okay, and Mom just smiled this weird frozen smile and slowly closed the door in her face. My brother found Mom in the basement burning photo albums filled with pictures from the old country, and when he asked what she was doing, she said she was getting rid of things that didn't matter anymore. She had tears streaming down her face while she watched our history turn to ash, but her expression never changed from that blank stare. She removed all the spices from the kitchen that she used to make our traditional meals and replaced them with bland American food that she cooked without any love or memory in it. When I tried to play the music from home that she used to dance to while cooking, she unplugged the speaker and said that music wasn't allowed anymore. She started making us practice speaking with perfect American accents and correcting us if even a hint of our real accent slipped through. She enrolled us in extra English classes, even though we were already fluent, and made us drop out of the heritage language school she'd forced us to attend every Saturday since we were 5. She went to the bank and legally changed her name to something generic and American and said we should think about doing the same when we turned 18. When my brother's teacher called to say he'd written his essay in our language as a rebellion, Mom apologized and said it would never happen again with this coldness that made my skin crawl. Then weird things started happening that made us realize this was about more than just language. Mom installed security cameras in every room, including our bedrooms, and said it was for our protection, but wouldn't say from what. She started checking locks on all windows and doors multiple times each night and moved her bedroom furniture so her bed faced the door. She bought thick curtains that blocked out all light and made us keep them closed so nobody could see inside. She changed her phone number and got us new phones with strict instructions to never give the numbers to anyone from our community. I heard her on the phone speaking in English but using code words that didn't make sense, like "the package is secure" and "maintaining cover as discussed." And when she saw me listening, she immediately hung up. She started teaching us how to tell if we were being followed and making us memorize escape routes from every room in the house. She made us practice packing emergency bags and told us if she ever said the word vacation, it meant we had to leave immediately, no questions asked. She showed us how to hide money in our shoes and clothes and made us promise never to tell anyone our real last name. One night I woke up and heard her crying in the bathroom speaking in our language, but not to anyone, just to herself like a prayer. She was saying, "They can never know what we really are, or they'll take my babies away and I'll do anything to keep them safe, even if it means erasing everything we were." When she came out and saw me standing there, she grabbed my shoulders and said in English that I must never speak our language again because there were people listening who would hurt us if they knew who we really were. My brother found documents hidden in the attic with our pictures, but different names and a newspaper clipping about 3 witnesses who disappeared before testifying in a war crimes trial. Mom walked in while he was reading and her face went white as she whispered, "They found us again." I can't move from the doorway and just watch Mom's hands shake so hard the papers make this rattling sound against each other. She drops them on the floor and grabs both me and my brother by our shoulders with this grip that hurts. She says we need to pack only what fits in our emergency bags, and we need to do it right now. Her voice comes out too calm and quiet, which somehow makes everything feel way more scary than if she was yelling. My brother tries to pull away, but she holds on tighter and says she's serious. We have maybe a few hours before we need to be ready to leave. I ask her what she means by they found us and who they are exactly. My brother's voice cracks when he demands to know what the newspaper clipping means and why there are documents with our pictures but different names. Mom lets go of our shoulders and sits down hard on the attic floor, like her legs just stopped working. She starts talking in broken sentences that don't quite connect, saying she worked as a translator during the conflict back home. She says she saw terrible things she can't describe to us because we're too young, even though I'm 16 and my brother is 14. She translated for militia commanders who trusted her because she was educated and seemed loyal to their cause. She saw them planning attacks on villages and ordering people to be killed, and she couldn't just stay quiet about it. When international investigators came asking questions, she made the choice to testify against the commanders, even though she knew it would put her in danger forever. 3 other witnesses who were supposed to testify disappeared before their trial dates, and nobody ever found their bodies. Mom says the commanders have people everywhere, even here in America, and they've been looking for her for 16 years. My brother asks why she never told us any of this before, and Mom says she thought if we didn't know, then we couldn't accidentally give anything away. She thought she could just erase our past completely, and we could blend in as a normal American family that nobody would look twice at. I feel my anger at her for taking away our culture start to shift into something more complicated and confused. She wasn't being cruel or trying to hurt us, she was just scared out of her mind this whole time. Mom stands up and says we need to move right now. We can talk more later, but first we need to pack. We spend the next 2 hours pulling out our emergency bags and filling them with clothes and supplies. Mom checks every window lock twice and keeps looking at her phone like she's waiting for a message or a warning. She goes through each room and unplugs things and closes curtains and does this whole routine that looks like she's practiced it 100 times in her head. While we pack, she explains more about why she made all those rules about English only and getting rid of our books and cultural items. She says it wasn't about forgetting who we are, it was about making sure nobody could identify us through our language or customs or anything that would mark us as being from our specific region. If we spoke our language in public, someone might overhear and recognize the dialect and report back to the people looking for her. If we kept cultural items in the house, someone might see them through a window or during a visit and make the connection. Every single thing she threw away or banned was about trying to make us invisible and untraceable. I start to understand that she's been living in fear every single day for 16 years, just waiting for the moment when they would find us. My anger doesn't go away completely, but it gets mixed up with feeling sorry for her and being scared myself. My brother doesn't say anything while we pack. He just moves around the room, grabbing things with his jaw set tight. Mom keeps checking her phone and looking out windows between checking on what we're packing. She tells us to bring layers of clothing we can wear in different weather and to pack protein bars and bottles of water. She makes us put cash in our shoes and in hidden pockets she sewed into our jackets months ago. Everything feels too real and too scary, and I can't quite believe this is actually happening. That night, I can't sleep at all and just lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every small sound in the house. Around 2 a.m, I give up and go downstairs to get water. I find Mom sitting in the dark kitchen with all the lights off, just staring at the back door like she's waiting for someone to break through it. I sit down next to her without turning on any lights, and we just sit there together in the dark. After a few minutes, she starts crying without making any sound, just tears running down her face. She starts talking in our language, the first time she's used it in months except for that one time I heard her in the bathroom. She apologizes for taking everything away from us and says she thought if she erased our past completely, we could just be normal. She says she wanted us to have regular American lives where we could be safe and happy and not always looking over our shoulders. She says she's sorry for being weak and for not being strong enough to protect us without destroying who we are. I don't know what to say, so I just put my hand on top of hers and we sit there until the sun starts coming up. The next morning, Mom calls in sick to work again, and I finally understand it's not about being lazy or unreliable. She's too scared to follow predictable patterns because that's how people get found, by doing the same things at the same times every day. She makes us stay home from the school too, and we spend the whole day sitting in the living room with the curtains drawn. We barely talk and just wait for something to happen, though none of us knows exactly what we're waiting for. Mom keeps checking her phone and looking at the security camera feeds and doing lock checks every hour. My brother sits on the couch staring at nothing, and I try to read a book but can't focus on the words. The house feels too small and too quiet, and the air feels heavy like before a storm. Hours pass and nothing happens, and somehow that makes it worse than if something actually did happen. My brother finally breaks the silence by asking Mom if we can ever go back to being ourselves. He wants to know if someday when it's safe we can speak our language again and cook our food and remember where we came from. Mom says maybe someday when the people looking for her are caught or dead or just give up, but she doesn't know when that will be. She says it might be years or it might be never, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that we'll have to hide forever. The weight of possibly spending the rest of my life pretending to be someone else hits me all at once. I feel like I can't breathe and have to get up and go to my room before I start crying in front of everyone. I lie on my bed and think about never speaking my real language again, or eating my grandmother's recipes or hearing the music from home. I think about growing up and getting married and having kids who will never know where their family really comes from. 2 days pass in this weird, suspended state where we barely leave the house and time feels like it's moving too slow and too fast at the same time. Mom keeps checking her phone over and over and doing her security routines and making us practice our emergency evacuation routes. My brother and I barely talk and just move through the house like ghosts. On the third morning, Mom announces that we're going to the school tomorrow because staying home is actually drawing more attention to us. She says the school has been calling, and if we miss any more days, they'll send someone to check on us. She tells us we need to be extra careful about not speaking our language or doing anything that makes us stand out. We need to act completely normal and boring and forgettable so nobody remembers us or thinks about us after we're gone. At the school the next day, I feel like everyone can see right through me to all the fear and secrets underneath. I keep thinking that people are staring at me even though obviously nobody knows anything. My friend comes up to me at lunch and asks if I'm okay because I've been acting weird lately. I just say family stuff and try to smile like it's no big deal. He asks if I want to talk about it and I say maybe later, which feels like the biggest lie I've ever told. The whole day I feel like I'm watching myself from outside my body, going through the motions of being a normal student while everything inside me is screaming. I decide I need to talk to someone outside my family because this is too big to carry by myself anymore. During study hall, I go to the office and make an appointment with the school counselor. Her name is Esme Meredith, and she's always seemed kind when I've seen her in the hallways. I'm hoping she can give me advice about how to deal with stress without me having to explain everything about the threats and the documents. The next day, I go to her office during my free period, and she offers me a seat and asks what's going on. I try to explain that my mom has been acting strange and making us get rid of all our cultural items and only speak English. I say she's been really stressed and paranoid and it's affecting the whole family. Esme listens carefully and nods and asks gentle questions about whether I feel safe at home. She asks if mom has ever hit us or hurt us or neglected to feed us or take care of us. She asks if there's been any abuse or anything that makes me feel unsafe. I start to realize this conversation might be heading somewhere dangerous and that if I say the wrong thing, someone might call child services. I backtrack and insist that everything is fine. Mom is just strict about school and homework and wants us to focus on fitting in. I say it's just normal, strict parent stuff. You know how some families are about grades and homework, trying to make my voice sound casual, even though my hands are shaking in my lap. Esme watches me for a long moment, and I can tell she's not buying the whole story, but she's not going to push me right now. She reaches into her desk drawer and pulls out a small white card with her name and phone number printed on it. She tells me she's required to follow up when she has concerns about a student's safety and well-being. The card feels heavy in my hand, like it weighs more than just paper and ink. She says I can call her anytime, day or night, if I need to talk or if anything changes at home. I nod and shove the card deep into my pocket, where Mom won't see it if she goes through my stuff later. I thank Esme and get out of her office as fast as I can without actually running, my heart beating too fast the whole walk back to class. That night, I'm doing homework at the kitchen table when Mom's phone rings and her whole face goes white like someone just told her the worst news possible. She answers and doesn't say much, just listens with her hand pressed against her mouth. When she hangs up, she stands frozen for a minute before telling my brother and me to come sit down. Her voice shakes when she says someone was asking questions about us at her work today. She won't tell us who it was or what kind of questions they asked. She just keeps saying we need to be even more careful now, that we can't trust anyone outside this house. She makes us promise again to stick to the cover story about being a normal American family with nothing interesting or unusual about us. My brother asks what happens if we mess up, and she just shakes her head and says we can't mess up, that's not an option anymore. The paranoia in our house goes up another level after that phone call, and it feels like we're living in a fortress instead of a home. Mom checks every single lock 3 times before bed, testing each window and door twice to make sure it's really secure. She makes us run through our emergency evacuation routes again, timing us with her phone to see how fast we can get from our bedrooms to the back door. My brother and I keep exchanging these looks that say we're both wondering if Mom is going crazy and overreacting to everything. But then I remember the newspaper clipping about the 3 witnesses who disappeared, and the fear doesn't seem so crazy anymore. I lie in bed that night listening to Mom walk around the house checking locks over and over, her footsteps creaking on the old floorboards until way past midnight. A week goes by with this weird tense feeling hanging over everything we do. Then one afternoon there's a knock on our front door, and Mom freezes in the middle of the living room like someone just pointed a gun at her. She pulls out her phone and checks the security camera feed, her hands shaking so bad she almost drops it. She whispers that it's a woman from Child Protective Services, and her eyes go wide with panic. She takes 3 deep breaths and smooths down her hair before opening the door with this bright fake smile plastered on her face. The woman introduces herself and says she's doing a wellness check based on a report from my school. Mom's hands are shaking, but she invites the woman inside and offers her coffee, like this is just a normal friendly visit. The CPS caseworker sits down on our couch and asks if she can speak with my brother and me separately from Mom. I see Mom's eyes flash with pure panic for just a second before she forces that fake smile back on and says, "Of course, whatever the woman needs." The caseworker takes my brother into the kitchen first, while I sit in the living room with Mom, both of us not talking, just listening to the low voices from the other room. When it's my turn, the woman asks me all these questions about our home life. She wants to know if Mom ever hits us or yells at us or leaves us alone for long periods. She asks if we always have enough food to eat and clean clothes to wear. She asks if Mom has ever hurt us on purpose or made us feel unsafe. Every question makes my stomach twist because I'm scared that saying the wrong thing will get us taken away and put in foster care where we'll be completely vulnerable. I tell her everything is fine and Mom just cares a lot about school and wants us to do well. I say Mom is strict but not mean and we have everything we need. My brother must say basically the same things because after the caseworker talks to both of us separately, she seems satisfied that we're okay. She tells Mom she'll be checking in again next month just to make sure everything stays stable. The caseworker writes some notes on her clipboard and then finally leaves, and the second the door closes behind her, Mom collapses onto the couch like all her bones just turned to liquid. She sits there with her head in her hands, looking like she might throw up all over the carpet. My brother and I stand there not knowing what to do or say while Mom tries to pull herself together. After a few minutes, Mom lifts her head and explains why the CPS visit is so dangerous for us. She says any kind of official government involvement creates records and draws attention to our family. If we get separated and put into foster care, we'll be completely vulnerable because we won't have each other for protection. Her voice cracks when she begs us to be normal at the school, to not give anyone any reason to worry or ask questions. She says we need to blend in perfectly and be forgettable so nobody thinks about us or remembers us later. I feel this huge weight settling onto my shoulders, the responsibility of keeping our family together and keeping us all safe. My brother looks like he feels it too, this pressure to be perfect and invisible at the same time. Over the next few days, I start really paying attention to whether anyone is watching our house or following us around. That's when I notice this dark car parked down the street that I swear I've seen at least 3 times this week. It's always in slightly different spots, but close enough that whoever is inside could see our front door. When I point it out to Mom, her face goes pale, and she immediately grabs her phone and calls a number she has saved without any name attached. She speaks in these weird code words that don't make any sense to me, saying things about packages and confirmation and maintaining position. I try to listen, but she sees me standing there and quickly hangs up, her hands still shaking. The next day, I'm standing on our front lawn staring at the spot where the dark car was parked earlier when our neighbor Jin Kang comes walking over from his house across the street. Jin is this retired engineer who always seems to notice everything that happens in the neighborhood. He mentions quietly that he's noticed the car too, along with someone checking our mailbox yesterday when we weren't home. His voice is casual, but his eyes are serious, like he understands this is important. He offers to keep an eye out and text Mom if he sees anything suspicious or unusual. I thank him and feel grateful that at least someone is paying attention and trying to help us. Jin pulls a small notepad from his pocket and sketches a quick diagram of our house and yard. He points out that our security cameras have blind spots in the side yard and back corner where someone could approach without being recorded. He shows me exactly where the gaps are and how someone could use them to get close to the house without us knowing. I take the diagram and bring it inside to Mom, my hands sweating because I know this information is going to make her more worried. When I show her Jin's sketch, she studies it with this mix of gratitude and new fear on her face. She thanks me and immediately starts looking at her phone, probably researching how to add more cameras to cover the blind spots Jin identified. That night, I wait until Mom finishes her 3rd lock check and goes to her room before I slip out the back door using the blind spot Jin showed me on the diagram. The air outside feels cold against my face, and I press myself against the side of the house where the camera can't see me. Through the kitchen window, I can see Mom pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. Her lips are moving fast, and she keeps checking the curtains like she's worried someone might be watching from outside. I edge closer to the window and catch fragments of what she's saying through the glass. She mentions transfer windows and secure locations, and something about needing confirmation before we can move. My stomach drops when I realize she's been planning our escape this whole time. She's just been waiting for the right moment or maybe some final signal that tells her we absolutely have to run. I watch her end the call and stand there staring at her phone with her shoulders shaking. When she turns toward the window, I duck down fast and crawl back to the blind spot before making my way inside through the basement door. The next morning, my brother corners Mom in the kitchen while she's making breakfast. He plants himself in front of the stove and asks when we're going to call Grandpa, because it's been almost 2 months. His voice cracks when he says Grandpa is old and probably thinks we're all dead. Mom's face goes hard, and she says we can't contact anyone from the old country because any connection could give away where we are. My brother's hands ball into fists, and he says she's being selfish and cruel. Mom sets down the spatula and tells him in this flat voice that she's keeping us alive, and that's all that matters. My brother calls her a coward and storms out of the kitchen. The front door slams so hard the windows rattle. Mom just stands there staring at the eggs burning in the pan. The tension between them gets worse over the next week. My brother barely speaks to Mom except to answer direct questions with one-word responses. At dinner, he deliberately uses words from our language when he asks me to pass the salt or tells me about his day. Mom's jaw tightens every time, but she doesn't say anything. She just stares at her plate and pushes food around without eating. I'm stuck in the middle trying to smooth things over and make everyone calm down. I tell my brother to cut it out and I tell Mom that he's just upset and doesn't mean it. But inside, I'm missing Grandpa so much it physically hurts. I keep thinking about his voice on the phone before Mom blocked his number and how confused and scared he sounded. At night, I lie in bed imagining him sitting alone in his house, wondering what he did wrong to make us disappear. The weight of it presses down on my chest until I can barely breathe. I make a decision I know is risky, but I can't just do nothing anymore. After school one day, I walk to the public library 3 blocks away and use one of their computers. I create a fake email address with a random name that has nothing to do with us. Then I write a message to the cultural center lady, explaining that my mom is in serious trouble and asking if there's any way to help without making things more dangerous. I don't include our names or address or any details that could identify us. I just say that Mom used to teach at the center, and now she's scared and we need help. My hands shake while I type, and I keep looking over my shoulder to make sure nobody is watching. After I hit send, I delete the browser history and log out of the email account. Walking home, I feel like I've lit a fuse on something I can't control. Every car that passes makes me jump. 3 days later, there's a knock on the door at 8 in the morning. Mom checks the security camera feed and her face goes pale. It's the CPS caseworker again, but this time she has a different expression. Less friendly and more official. Mom opens the door with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. The caseworker says she's following up on some concerning reports about potential neglect and emotional abuse. She needs to interview all of us separately and look around the house. Mom's voice stays calm when she agrees, but I can see her hands trembling as she leads the caseworker inside. The woman asks me questions about whether Mom feeds us properly and whether she ever hits us or locks us in our rooms. She wants to know if we're allowed to have friends over and whether Mom seems paranoid or unstable. I answer carefully saying everything is fine and Mom is just strict about school. The caseworker writes notes in her folder, and her expression says she doesn't quite believe me. Before she leaves, she tells Mom she's opening a case file for ongoing monitoring. Mom nods and thanks her for her concern. The second the door closes, Mom sinks onto the couch looking like she might throw up. After the caseworker's car pulls away, Mom calls my brother and me into the living room. She sits us down on the couch and takes a deep breath. Then she starts explaining things she's never told us before. She says that back home she worked as a translator for militia commanders during the conflict. They trusted her because she was educated and spoke multiple languages and seemed loyal to their cause. But while she was translating their meetings and phone calls, she heard them planning massacres. She heard them ordering executions of entire villages. She heard them laughing about it. When international investigators came to build a case against them, Mom made the choice to testify. She turned over documents and recordings and gave detailed testimony about everything she'd witnessed. She knew it would put her and us in danger forever, but she couldn't live with staying silent. The commanders swore they would find her and make her pay. 3 other witnesses who were supposed to testify disappeared before their trial dates. Their bodies were never found. Hearing the full story makes me understand Mom's terror in a completely different way. All this time, I've been angry about losing our culture and our language and our connection to home, but Mom has been trying to keep us alive. She's been carrying this massive weight of fear and guilt and responsibility all by herself. I feel awful for being mad at her and for not understanding what she was going through. My brother sits next to me with his jaw clenched tight. He's still angry, but I can see him processing the information. His hands grip the edge of the couch cushion and his eyes are red. Mom reaches out to touch his shoulder, but he pulls away. She drops her hand and looks at the floor. The next day at the school, I have to give a presentation in English class. Some kids in the back row start whispering and laughing when I'm talking. One of them makes a comment about my accent sounding weird. I freeze up and then overcorrect by speaking in this exaggerated American way that sounds completely fake. My voice gets higher and I pronounce every word too carefully. The whole class goes quiet and people exchange uncomfortable looks. Even the teacher seems confused. When I sit down, my face burns with shame. I feel like my identity is breaking into pieces that don't fit together anymore. I'm not fully myself because I can't speak my language or practice my culture. But I'm also not successfully invisible because people can still tell I'm different. I exist in this horrible in-between space where I don't belong anywhere. After school, I walk to a payphone near the gas station and use quarters to make a call. I found a legal aid organization online that handles witness intimidation cases. A man answers and says his name is Gregory Vargas. He's a lawyer, but he also does investigative journalism about failures in witness protection programs. I explain our situation really carefully without giving our names or exact location. I tell him about Mom testifying years ago, and about people tracking us down and about the surveillance we've noticed. Gregory listens without interrupting, and then asks specific questions about the timeline and the threats. His voice is calm and professional, and it makes me feel like maybe someone actually knows how to help us. Gregory says he's been documenting a pattern of witnesses being tracked down years after they testified. He's found that militia sympathizers in the U.S. have been systematically hunting down people who spoke out against war criminals. They often use cultural community connections to identify witnesses. They look for language use and cultural practices that reveal someone's origin. He says he can look into our case if I can send him any documentation we have. But he warns me that going public with information could actually increase our danger in the short term. The people looking for us might escalate if they think we're about to expose them. I thank him and write down his encrypted email address on a scrap of paper. When I hang up the phone, my hands won't stop shaking. I walk home from the gas station with Gregory's email address folded in my pocket and my mind racing with what I need to do next. The house is quiet when I get back because Mom is in her room and my brother is at a friend's place. I wait until I hear Mom's shower running before I sneak up to the attic and pull down the ladder as quietly as I can. My heart pounds so hard I can hear it in my ears while I dig through the box where my brother found the documents. I find the papers with the redacted sections and the newspaper clipping, and I take out my phone with my hands shaking so badly I almost drop it twice. I snap photos of every page, making sure the text is clear enough to read, even though most of the important parts are blacked out with thick marker. I can see our old names peeking through some of the redactions, and there are case numbers and dates that might mean something to Gregory. I send everything to his encrypted email address and then delete the photos from my phone and clear my deleted folder too. The whole time I'm terrified Mom will finish her shower early and catch me, but I know we need help from someone who understands how these systems work. I put the documents back exactly how I found them and climb down from the attic, and my legs feel weak when my feet hit the hallway floor. 3 days later, I'm doing homework at the kitchen table when Mom comes downstairs with a look on her face that makes my stomach drop. She asks me in this scary, calm voice if I've been in the attic recently, and I say no while trying to keep my expression normal. She tells me the documents have been moved and someone has been going through her private things, and she needs to know if it was me. I stick to my lie and say, maybe I went up there looking for old photo albums because I wanted to see pictures from when I was little. Mom's hands are shaking and she gets right in my face and says that curiosity could get us all killed, and I need to understand that every single thing she does is to keep us safe. She says people are looking for us who want to hurt us, and if they find any evidence we're who they think we are, then we're all dead. Her voice cracks on the last word, and I can see she's barely holding it together. She goes back upstairs, and I hear her installing a lock on the attic door, and then she comes down with the key on a chain around her neck, where I can see it under her shirt. The next week, Mom drills us on emergency procedures every single night after dinner. She makes us pack and repack our go bags over and over until we can do it in under 3 minutes without forgetting anything. She times us with a stopwatch, and if we go over 3 minutes, we have to start completely over. She adds new items to the bags, including prepaid phones still in the packaging and thick stacks of cash and small bills that she's been hiding somewhere. The scariest part is when she shows us copies of identification documents with our photos, but completely different names and birth dates. I didn't even know these fake IDs existed, and seeing my face with someone else's name makes me feel like I'm disappearing. My brother asks where she got these, and Mom just says she's had them ready since before we moved to this house. She makes us memorize the fake names and practice signing them until the signatures look natural. Every night we practice the same routine until my hands can pack the bag in my sleep, and I know my fake name as well as my real one. Mom loses her job at the community college 2 weeks later. She comes home in the middle of the day, and her face is red like she's been crying, and she goes straight to her room without saying anything. The letter is formal and cold and doesn't care that Mom has been terrified for our lives this whole time. That night, Mom sits at the computer for hours looking at remote work listings, but everything either doesn't pay enough or requires video calls and regular schedules. She needs something she can do from anywhere at any time in case we have to run, but those jobs barely exist. I hear her on the phone with the bank asking about payment plans for the mortgage, and her voice sounds small and defeated. The bills pile up on the counter and Mom starts making cheaper meals with less food, and I know the money situation is getting really bad, really fast. My brother gets caught using a chat app to talk with friends from Heritage School in our language. Mom finds his phone on the couch and sees the messages, and her face goes from white to red in about 2 seconds. She starts yelling that he's putting the whole family at risk, and doesn't he understand that people could be monitoring these apps looking for exactly this kind of communication? My brother yells back that she's erasing us anyway, so what difference does it make if we get caught being who we actually are? He says he'd rather die being himself than live as this fake person Mom is forcing him to become. Mom slaps the phone out of his hand and it hits the wall and the screen cracks. She confiscates it and says he's not getting it back, and he screams that she can't control everything and storms off to his room. They don't speak to each other for 2 days after that, and the silence in the house is worse than the fighting. I try to talk to my brother through his bedroom door, but he won't answer me either. A woman shows up at our door on a Tuesday afternoon with federal credentials and a leather wallet. She introduces herself as Deb Hartman and says she's the handler who was assigned to our case years ago when Mom first testified against the militia commanders. Mom's face goes pale when she sees the credentials, and she lets Deb inside immediately and locks the door behind her. Deb sits down at our kitchen table and opens a folder with papers and photos, and she explains she's been monitoring threats against witnesses from Mom's trial. She says recent activity suggests the people looking for Mom have narrowed their search to our region, and there have been inquiries at places Mom used to work and locations our family used to visit. Deb shows us surveillance photos of men asking questions at the cultural center and outside our old Heritage School building. She says the threat level has increased significantly in the past month, and we need to implement stricter protocols immediately. Deb sits with our whole family and lays out new rules that make Mom's previous restrictions look relaxed. She says absolutely no community contact of any kind, and no cultural activities, and no speaking our language even at home. She talks about entering formal witness protection with completely new identities and relocation to a random city where nobody from our community would ever think to look. Mom asks in this defeated voice if that means we can never be ourselves again, and Deb looks at her with these hard eyes and says, "It means we stay alive." She explains that 6 other witness families have been tracked down in the past decade, and 3 of those families didn't survive the encounters. Deb says the people hunting us are connected to militia sympathizers in the US who have resources and patience, and they won't stop looking until they find us, or we disappear so completely they can't. I ask Deb if we can keep just one thing from our culture, and I mention the prayer banner that Grandma made before she died. Deb shakes her head and says no, because any item could be recognized by someone who knows what to look for. She explains that people tracking witnesses often use cultural objects as identifying markers, and even something small could give us away. The absolute nature of the erasure hits me again, and I feel my throat getting tight. I have to leave the room before I say something I'll regret, because I know Deb is trying to help, but it feels like she's asking us to die in a different way. I go to my room and sit on the floor with my back against the door, and I can hear them still talking downstairs about safe houses and communication protocols. The CPS caseworker returns for another check-in the next week, and Deb is there to intercept before the woman can ask too many questions. Deb presents her federal credentials and explains in vague terms that our family is under federal protection due to witness intimidation concerns. The caseworker looks skeptical and asks why she wasn't informed of this during her previous visits, and Deb says the information is classified and on a need-to-know basis. They go back and forth for a while, with the caseworker insisting she has a duty to ensure our welfare, and Deb saying federal protection supersedes local child services jurisdiction. Finally, the caseworker agrees to coordinate with Deb's office and close her active investigation, but I can see she's not happy about it. After she leaves, Deb tells Mom this is just barely keeping us from being separated, and if CPS had pushed harder, they could have taken us into foster care where we'd be completely vulnerable. Gregory emails me back 3 days later through the encrypted address. He says he's verified our case matches a pattern of at least 6 other witness families who've been tracked down over the past decade. He's found evidence that a network of militia sympathizers in the US has been systematically hunting down people who testified using cultural communities as surveillance networks. They monitor heritage schools and cultural centers and community events looking for families that match profiles of missing witnesses. Gregory says he wants to write an article exposing this pattern, but he needs more documentation, and he asks if I can get him copies of the federal case files or threat assessments. I stare at his email, knowing that getting those documents would mean going behind both Mom's and Deb's backs, and possibly making everything worse, but also knowing that maybe exposing this whole system is the only way to actually stop it. I spend the next 2 hours staring at Gregory's email and thinking about what happens if I actually give him those documents, how it could blow up everything, or maybe save us. And I'm still awake at 3 a.m. when I hear a weird gasping sound from the bathroom. I get up and find Mom sitting on the floor with her back against the tub, her chest heaving like she can't get enough air, her face red and sweaty and scared in a way I've never seen before. She's making these horrible choking sounds and clawing at her throat like something's blocking it, and for a second I think she's actually dying right there in front of me. I drop down next to her and grab her hands because I remember reading somewhere that panic attacks make you feel like you're suffocating even though you're not. And I start talking in this calm voice I don't really feel, telling her to breathe with me. I count out loud. 4 seconds in through the nose, hold for 4, out through the mouth for 4, and after maybe 10 rounds of this, her breathing starts to slow down and match mine. Her grip on my hands is so tight it hurts, but I don't pull away, just keep counting and breathing and watching her face gradually shift from that terrible panic to something more like exhaustion. When she can finally talk, she just says sorry over and over, her voice all rough and broken, and she holds my hand against her chest so I can feel her heartbeat starting to calm down. She tells me she's sorry for being so weak when she needs to be strong for us, sorry for falling apart, sorry for everything, and I tell her she's the strongest person I know because weak people don't testify against war criminals. We sit there on the cold bathroom floor for another 20 minutes until she can stand up without shaking, and when we finally go back to our rooms, I hear her crying through the wall, but quieter now, more tired than scared. The next afternoon, Jin catches me when I'm checking the mail and slips me a small USB drive, his eyes doing this quick scan of the street before he leans in close. He tells me his security cameras caught some interesting footage over the past week, people he's never seen before walking up and down our block taking pictures of houses, and there's a partial license plate from that dark car that keeps parking down the street. I thank him, and he just nods and goes back to his yard work like we were talking about the weather, but I can see he's worried too. I take the USB straight to my room and plug it into my laptop, and the footage shows exactly what Jin said. 3 different people on 3 different days, stopping in front of our house and taking photos with their phones. The car footage is grainy, but I can make out part of the plate, and the fact that it's a dark sedan with tinted windows, and my stomach drops because this is proof that we're actually being watched. I call Deb using the secure number she gave us and tell her about the USB, and she says to put it in a plastic bag and leave it in our mailbox. She'll have someone pick it up within the hour. 2 hours later, Deb calls back, and her voice has this tight edge to it when she says the footage confirms the threat is active and escalating, that her team is running the partial plate, but we need to be extremely careful right now. Deb tells us to shelter in place and avoid all trips outside the house that aren't absolutely necessary, while her team tracks down the people doing surveillance, and suddenly we're basically prisoners in our own home. The first day isn't so bad because we're all still scared enough that staying inside feels safer than going out. But by day 2, the walls start feeling closer, and the air feels stale even with the windows cracked. Mom keeps checking the security camera feeds on her phone every few minutes, and my brother paces from room to room like a caged animal, his energy getting more and more twitchy. By day 3, I'm ready to climb out of my skin, and I catch myself staring out the window through the curtains at people walking by, and wondering what it would feel like to just be normal and go outside without worrying about who might be watching. My brother stops talking to anyone and just sits in his room with his headphones on, and when I knock on his door to check on him, he barely looks up. Mom tries to keep us busy with movies and board games like we're little kids, but none of us can focus on anything except the fact that we're trapped and waiting for Deb to tell us what happens next. The house feels smaller every hour, like the walls are actually moving inward, and I start understanding why prisoners go crazy in solitary confinement. On the 4th morning, my brother finally comes out of his room and tells me he arranged to meet the cultural center lady at a coffee shop that afternoon, his voice low and urgent like he's confessing something terrible. I stare at him and ask if he's completely lost his mind after everything Deb just said about staying inside, and he says he doesn't care anymore because he's desperate to speak our language with someone who understands. He explains that he contacted her through an old email account Mom doesn't know about, and she agreed to meet him because she's been worried about our family since Mom cut off all contact. My brother's eyes are red like he's been crying, and he grabs my arm hard. When he says we deserve to have one moment of being ourselves before we disappear forever. One conversation in our real language with someone from our community before Mom erases everything completely. I tell him it's too dangerous and Deb will kill us if she finds out, but he says he's going with or without me, and he'd rather have backup. I can see he's serious and also kind of desperate in a way that scares me, and I think about how it's been months since either of us spoke our language out loud with anyone except each other in whispers. Against every smart instinct I have, I tell my brother I'll go with him to meet the cultural center lady, and we sneak out through the back door while Mom is on a call with Deb about something. We take 2 different bus routes to make sure nobody follows us and meet up at the coffee shop 3 blocks from where we actually want to go, then walk the rest of the way checking behind us constantly. The cultural center lady is already there at a corner table, and her face lights up when she sees us, and she immediately starts speaking in our language, asking if we're okay and what happened to Mom. For 20 minutes, we sit there and speak freely in our real language for the first time in months, and it feels like breathing after holding your breath underwater too long. She bought food from a restaurant that makes dishes from home, and we eat and talk and laugh, and I almost forget why we had to sneak out to do this. But then I notice 2 men at a nearby table who weren't there when we arrived, and they're watching us with this focused attention that makes my skin crawl. One of them leans over and starts asking questions in our language about where we're from and whether we know anyone from our specific region, his accent marking him as someone from the same area Mom testified against. The cultural center lady's face goes pale, and she stands up fast, knocking her chair back, and my brother and I are already moving toward the exit because we recognize the trap too late. My brother and I split up like Mom taught us, him heading for the back exit through the kitchen, and me going through the main door and then cutting through the service corridor that connects to the alley. My heart is beating so hard I can hear it in my ears, and my hands are shaking as I push through the heavy door and start running, taking random turns to make sure nobody can follow my path. I meet my brother 6 blocks away at the gas station we'd picked as a backup meeting point, and we're both breathing hard and looking over our shoulders every few seconds. He's shaking worse than me and keeps saying he's sorry. He didn't think they'd find us there. He just wanted one normal moment. We take another bus and then walk the last mile home, and when we come through the back door, Deb is already sitting at our kitchen table looking absolutely furious. She stands up and asks in this deadly quiet voice if we have any idea what we just did. And before we can answer, she says her team tracked the 2 men from the coffee shop directly to our location because we led them straight home. Deb says we've forced her hand and we need to relocate immediately, possibly tonight, because the men now have visual confirmation and will be watching all our usual locations. Mom walks in from the living room and looks at my brother and me with this mixture of anger and complete despair that makes me feel sick, and I can see her mentally calculating everything we just destroyed by being stupid. Deb is already on her phone calling her team and throwing around words like extraction and emergency protocols, and Mom just sinks into a chair like all the air went out of her. My brother tries to apologize, but Mom holds up her hand to stop him, and the look on her face is worse than if she'd yelled or hit us. I feel this crushing guilt settling onto my chest because I knew better, and I went anyway, and now we might have to leave tonight and lose even the small amount of normal life we'd managed to build here. While Deb and Mom argue about logistics in the living room, I pull my brother into the hallway, and we have a whispered fight about his recklessness, my voice shaking with anger and fear. He says he doesn't care about being safe if it means never being himself, that he'd rather take risks than live as a fake person forever. I tell him that's easy to say when you're not the one who watched Mom testify and destroy her whole life to protect us, when you don't understand what she actually gave up. He says I don't get it because I'm willing to just accept whatever they tell us to do, and I say he doesn't get it because he's too selfish to see past his own feelings. We're both crying now and trying to stay quiet so Mom and Deb don't hear, and finally my brother just slides down the wall and puts his head in his hands. Mom calls us both into the living room and tells us to sit down, her voice flat and tired in a way that's somehow scarier than anger. She says she needs to tell us the complete truth she's been hiding, the part she thought we were too young to know, and Deb nods like she already knows what's coming. Mom explains that she wasn't just a translator during the conflict, she was engaged to one of the militia commanders and translated for him specifically. She says she loved him and believed in what he said about protecting our people, and it wasn't until she saw him planning massacres and ordering executions that she realized what she'd gotten involved in. When she tried to confront him, he laughed and said this was war, and she needed to be stronger, so she started stealing documents and recording conversations until she had enough evidence to turn over to international investigators. Mom's voice breaks when she says he found out right before she testified and swore he would find her and make her watch her children die before killing her, that he'd hunt her across the world if he had to. The revelation that Mom betrayed someone she loved to stop terrible things makes everything more complicated, and I finally understand why she's been so extreme about erasing our past. My brother is crying openly now, and he says he's sorry about the coffee shop, that he didn't know, that he wouldn't have gone if he understood. Mom reaches out and pulls us both close, and we all hold each other while crying, and I can hear Deb in the next room making phone calls about safe houses and extraction teams. Mom keeps saying she's sorry for bringing this danger into our lives, and my brother and I both tell her she did the right thing, even though it cost us everything. We sit there on the couch holding onto each other like we're drowning, and through the doorway I can see Deb pacing and talking urgently into her phone about how soon they can move us. I barely sleep that night because every sound makes me think someone's breaking in. And when I finally drift off, I wake up to Deb standing in my doorway at 2 a.m, saying the word vacation in this flat, calm voice that makes my stomach drop. I grab my go bag from under the bed where it's been sitting packed for weeks, and my hands shake so bad I almost drop it while pulling on shoes, and my brother appears in the hallway looking pale and scared in the dim light from the street. Mom's already at the back door checking through the window, and Deb leads us out through the yard staying close to the fence where the shadows are darkest, and there's an unmarked white van waiting in the alley with the engine running. We climb in the back where there are no windows, and Deb gets in front with the driver who doesn't say anything or look back at us, and we pull away from our house without the headlights on until we reach the main road. Mom sits between me and my brother in the dark, holding both our hands, and I can feel her whole body shaking, but she doesn't make any sound, and after about 20 minutes I see her pull out her phone with the brightness turned way down. She's looking at photos of our house and scrolling through pictures of the kitchen and living room and her bedroom, and I watch tears run down her face in the glow from the screen, but her expression stays completely blank, like she's watching someone else's life disappear. We drive for 3 hours through empty highways and small towns that all look the same in the dark, and nobody talks except once when my brother asks where we're going, and Deb just says somewhere safe without turning around. The sun is starting to come up when we finally pull into a motel parking lot in a town I've never heard of, and Deb makes us wait in the van while she goes inside to get keys and check that everything is clear. She comes back and leads us to a room on the second floor at the back of the building, and the room has 2 beds and a table and nothing else, and it smells like old cigarettes and cleaning chemicals. Deb tells us to get some sleep and that she'll be back in a few hours to talk about options, and Mom just nods and sits down on one of the beds still holding her phone with the photos. My brother and I share the other bed, and I lie there staring at the ceiling listening to Mom cry quietly and wondering if we're ever going back home or if this is just the first stop in running forever. When Deb comes back later that morning, she brings food from somewhere and sets it on the table, but none of us are hungry, and the smell of the eggs makes me feel sick. She sits down across from Mom and opens a folder with papers inside and starts explaining our options in this professional voice like she's giving a presentation at the school. The first option is entering formal witness protection, which means new identities and new social security numbers and relocation to a city chosen by the program where nobody knows us and we can start completely over. Mom asks what happens to us kids, and Deb says we'd all go together as a family unit, but we'd have to cut all ties with extended family permanently, including Grandpa and everyone back in the old country. The second option is trying to disappear on our own without federal support, which means we'd have more freedom about where to go and what names to use, but we wouldn't have any backup if something went wrong. Deb explains that the program can provide housing and job placement and some financial support for the first year. But after that, we're on our own, and if we break any of the rules like contacting old friends or using our real names, we're out of the program completely. Mom asks how long we'd have to stay hidden, and Deb says there's no time limit because the threat doesn't expire, and some families have been in protection for over 20 years. My brother makes this choking sound and leaves the room, and I hear him throwing up in the bathroom, and Mom just sits there looking at the papers like they're written in a language she doesn't understand. Deb gives us until tomorrow to decide, and says her team is already working on securing our old house, and that we can't go back there no matter what we choose. We spend the next week trapped in that motel room watching TV with the sound low and eating takeout food that all tastes like cardboard. Deb comes by every day with papers for Mom to sign and updates about the house, and I watch our entire life get taken apart through phone calls and documents spread across the table. Mom signs papers to put the house on the market and agrees to sell it fast, even though it means losing money, and she signs papers to close her bank accounts and transfer everything to new accounts with different names. She calls her boss at the community college and quits over the phone, making up some story about a family emergency, and I can hear the concern in her boss's voice through the speaker, asking if everything is okay. Deb's team packs up our belongings and puts most of it in storage under a fake name. And Mom has to make lists of what to keep and what to get rid of, and she keeps stopping to cry over random things like my brother's baby shoes or a coffee mug from our first apartment. I watch movers load our furniture into a truck through Deb's phone camera and see our neighbors standing on their porches looking confused and concerned, and I wonder what story Deb told them about why we left so suddenly. The cultural center lady calls Mom's old number 3 times, and Mom doesn't answer, but I can see her staring at the missed calls like she wants to call back and explain everything. On the 4th day, Deb brings news that the house sold to a cash buyer, and closing will happen in 2 weeks, and Mom just nods and signs more papers without reading them, and I realize she's not really processing any of this anymore. I corner Deb in the motel parking lot one morning while she's getting coffee from her car, and ask if there's any way to maintain contact with Grandpa through official channels, because I can't stand the thought of him thinking we're dead, or that we abandoned him. Deb looks at me for a long moment, and then says she can arrange a monitored call every few months through a secure relay where someone listens to make sure we don't give away location details or use our real names. She explains that the calls would be recorded and analyzed, and if anyone says anything that compromises security, the whole arrangement gets shut down permanently. I ask if that's really the best option, and she says it's the only option, unless we want to risk Grandpa's safety too, because if the people looking for us figure out we're still in contact, they might go after him to get information. I tell Mom about the monitored calls, and she looks relieved for the first time in days and says it's worth the small risk if it keeps Grandpa from thinking we're dead or that he did something wrong to make us cut him off. Deb sets up the first call for next week and gives us strict instructions about what we can and cannot say, and Mom writes notes to herself about how to explain our disappearance without actually explaining anything. Gregory sends me an email through the encrypted address I set up and says he wants to write a story about the systematic intimidation of witnesses using our case anonymously to push for better protection programs and reform. He's found patterns in at least 6 other families who were tracked down years after testifying, and he thinks exposing the problem publicly might force the government to take witness security more seriously. I show the email to Mom and she goes pale and says absolutely not, because any publicity could draw more attention to us, even if our names aren't used. I argue that maybe exposing the problem is the only way to eventually stop it, and that other families might be safer if people knew how broken the system is. Mom and I go back and forth for an hour with her saying it's too dangerous, and me saying we can't just hide forever while other people go through the same thing. Finally, Mom agrees to let Gregory write the story, as long as he changes enough details that nobody could identify us specifically, and she makes me promise to review everything before it gets published. I email Gregory back with Mom's conditions, and he agrees and says he'll send us drafts to approve, and that he understands we're taking a huge risk by letting him tell even an anonymous version of our story. The CPS caseworker who's been checking on us shows up at the motel on day 6, and Deb intercepts her in the parking lot before she can knock on our door. I watch through the window as Deb shows her federal credentials and paperwork, and the caseworker's expression goes from concerned to confused to reluctantly satisfied. Deb comes back 20 minutes later and says the case is officially closed because we're under protective custody, and the family situation is being monitored by federal authorities, which satisfies the legal requirements. It's one less thing to worry about, though. Deb mentions the caseworker still looked concerned about the impact on us kids and asked if we'd have access to counseling and support services in our new location. Mom asks if CPS could still cause problems later, and Deb says not unless we do something that creates new concerns, but that we need to be careful about maintaining the appearance of a stable, normal family once we relocate. I feel relieved that we don't have to worry about being separated into foster care, but also sad that the caseworker was probably the last person outside our situation who genuinely cared about our welfare. On our last day before moving to the safe house, I tell Mom I need to go for a walk to clear my head, and she's so exhausted she just nods without asking questions. I take the bus back to our old neighborhood and walk past our house, which already has a sold sign in the yard and curtains I don't recognize in the windows. I keep walking until I reach the Heritage School building where we used to go every Saturday, and the door is locked, but there's a book return box on the side. I pull out one of the language books I grabbed from my go bag before we left, and write a note on the inside cover thanking the teachers for trying to preserve our culture and explaining that I have to leave, but I'll never forget what they taught us. I drop the book in the return slot and stand there crying on the sidewalk for a few minutes before pulling myself together and walking back to the bus stop. The whole drive back to the motel, I keep thinking about all the parts of myself I'm leaving behind and wondering if I'll ever get them back, or if this is just who I am now, someone without a history or a home. We move into a temporary safe house in a suburb where every house looks exactly the same, and all the lawns are the same length, and nobody seems to know their neighbors. The house is furnished with generic furniture from a catalog, and there's nothing personal anywhere, no photos or books or anything that would tell you who lives here. It feels like living in a waiting room for a life that hasn't started yet, and I catch myself looking around for things that belong to us, before remembering we don't have things anymore. Mom tries to make the place feel like home by cooking dinner the first night, but all the spices are basic American ones, and the food tastes bland and forgettable. My brother barely talks anymore and spends most of his time in his room staring at the wall, and I don't know how to help him because I'm barely holding myself together. Deb comes by to check on us and brings papers about school enrollment and job applications and all the practical things we need to do to build our cover identities, but none of it feels real. I keep one tiny thing against the rules that I know I shouldn't, but I can't help myself. Before we left the motel, I went back to our old house one more time when nobody was watching and grabbed a single clove seed from the spice jar Mom had thrown away. I hide it in the hem of my jacket where nobody will find it, and just knowing it's there makes me feel less erased, like I still have proof that we existed before all this. Sometimes I reach into my pocket and touch the little bump where the seed is hidden, and it's my secret rebellion and connection to who we really are underneath all the fake names and cover stories. I know if Deb found it, she'd make me throw it away and explain again how any connection to our past is dangerous, but this one tiny seed feels like the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Deb shows up one morning with news that makes Mom actually smile for the first time in weeks. One of the men who was tracking us got arrested on an unrelated weapons charge during a traffic stop, and he's being held without bail because he's a flight risk with connections overseas. Deb says it's not a complete solution, because there are still others out there, but it removes one immediate threat and buys us some breathing room to get settled in our new location. Mom sleeps through the whole night for the first time in months, without getting up to check locks or look out windows. And when I see her at breakfast the next morning, she looks younger somehow, like a little bit of the weight lifted off her shoulders. My brother even makes a joke at breakfast, and Mom laughs, and for just a second, we almost feel like a normal family having a normal morning in our normal house, and I let myself believe that maybe we can actually survive this after all. But that hope shatters 3 days later when my brother explodes during dinner. He throws his fork down and yells that he hates this fake life in this fake house with this fake bland food. He says he wishes Mom had never testified because we'd be better off back home even under a dictatorship than living like ghosts in America. Mom stands up so fast her chair falls backward, and before I can process what's happening, she slaps him across the face. The sound cracks through the kitchen, and my brother's head snaps to the side, and we all freeze because Mom has never hit either of us in our entire lives. Her hand is still raised, and she's staring at it like it belongs to someone else. Then she crumples and starts sobbing and reaches for my brother, but he jerks away from her touch. He says he hates her and storms out the front door, and Mom collapses into her chair with her face in her hands. I sit there not knowing whether to go after my brother or comfort Mom, and end up just sitting frozen while Mom cries. She keeps apologizing to the empty air, saying she's sorry in both languages mixed together. I eventually go to my room because I can't handle watching her fall apart, and I hear the front door open an hour later when my brother comes back. That night I can't sleep, and I'm lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I hear something so faint I almost miss it. Mom is singing a lullaby from our culture and our language. The sound is barely a whisper coming from her room down the hall, and I hold my breath so I can hear it better. She only gets through a few lines before she stops, and I hear her crying instead. But those few lines of song in our real language give me this tiny spark of hope that maybe we're not completely erased after all. Maybe Mom is still in there somewhere underneath all the fear and the fake American identity. The next morning, I check my encrypted email on the library computer, and there's a link to Gregory's article. It published in a major national outlet with the headline about systematic failures in witness protection programs. He doesn't use our names or identifying details, but I recognize our story in the section about families forced to erase their cultural identities to avoid detection. Reading about our nightmare in print makes it feel validated and real. Someone besides us knows this is happening and cares enough to expose it. I read the whole article twice and saved the link in a folder I labeled with random numbers. 2 days later, Deb shows up with news that makes Mom cry with relief instead of fear. She arranged a monitored call with Grandpa through some kind of secure relay system. We each get exactly 5 minutes to talk while someone listens and translates to make sure we don't reveal location details. When Grandpa's voice comes through the speaker, he's already crying and saying he thought we were dead. Mom goes first and tells him in English that we're safe and we love him, and we can't explain anything, but we're okay. Grandpa keeps asking where we are and what happened, and the translator cuts in to say those questions aren't allowed. My brother gets his 5 minutes next, and he just tells Grandpa about school and normal things while crying silently. Then it's my turn, and I tell Grandpa I miss him, and I remember everything he taught me, and I'll never forget where I come from. Grandpa says he loves us and he prays for us every day, and then the 5 minutes are up and the call ends. We all sit in the living room afterward not talking because there's nothing to say. That night I start a journal, but I write it in English using a simple code I invented where I substitute letters and numbers in a pattern only I know. It becomes my way of writing about our real identity without anyone else being able to read it if they find it. I write about who we really are and where we really come from and what our real names are. The journal feels like holding on to a piece of myself that the cover story can't touch. 3 weeks later, we make the final move to our permanent new city across the country. The moving truck is smaller this time because we don't have much stuff anymore. The new house is in a regular neighborhood with trees on the street and kids riding bikes. Deb says the threat level decreased enough that we can try to build a real life here. This house has way fewer security cameras and feels more normal, even though we still have to maintain our cover identities. Mom sets up our bedrooms and tries to make the place feel like home. Deb's visits become less frequent, and when she does check in, it feels more like support than surveillance. Mom enrolls us in therapy with a counselor who has security clearance to know the basic situation without details. Having someone to talk to who understands that we're hiding from real danger helps me process everything. The therapist teaches me ways to manage anxiety and how to hold two identities at once without losing myself. On my first day at the new school, I stand in the office practicing my cover name in my head. When the intake counselor asks my name, I say the fake name out loud, but inside my head, I say my real name. I'm learning to hold both identities at the same time, the public one that keeps us safe and the private one that keeps me whole. I introduce myself to my homeroom teacher using our cover name and sit in the back row. A few kids try to talk to me at lunch and I give them the cover story about moving here for my mom's job. It feels weird but also kind of normal. Our family has breakfast together in the new house on Saturday morning, and Mom makes pancakes. Under the table, she reaches out and squeezes both my hand and my brother's hand at the same time. Nobody says anything, but we all understand it's her way of acknowledging everything we survived together. We're not the same people we were before, and we never will be. But we're alive and together and slowly building something new from the pieces of what we had to leave behind. The future is uncertain, and we'll always be looking over our shoulders. But for the first time in months, I feel like maybe we can actually make it through this. That's the story for today. I am really glad you took a little time to listen. I hope it brought a bit of comfort or peace to your day. Subscribe if you would like to keep sharing more stories like this together.